It was 4:17 a.m., and across thousands of kilometers, lights didn't just flicker, they hesitated, as if an entire system felt something coming before the first explosion ever arrived. This was never about a single night, never about a headline. Long before the drones lifted into the dark, Ukraine had already made a decision more dangerous than any missile launch. It chose strategy over spectacle. While the world counted shells and tanks, Ukraine started counting something else: fuel flows, repair cycles, radar fatigue, response time. War stripped down to its algorithm. By 2025, the logic was cold and unforgiving. Armies don't move on courage alone. Jets don't fly on speeches. Missiles don't launch on ideology. They run on energy: refined oil, diesel, aviation fuel, cash converted into combustion. So Ukraine stopped asking how to defeat Russia everywhere, and started asking where Russia couldn't afford to bleed. Oil refineries became pressure points. Fuel depots turned into countdown clocks. Air bases weren't symbols anymore. They were nodes in a system that could be slowed, stressed, and eventually fractured. One strike didn't matter. Two barely registered. But 10, 20? Repetition created something firepower alone never could: exhaustion. Every attack forced a choice: repair this facility or reinforce that one. Move air defenses here or leave another corridor open. Each response created a gap. Each gap became data. Ukraine watched, adjusted, iterated. This wasn't brute force. It was learning in real time, sharpening every move like a blade dragged slowly across stone. Think of the comparison: a refinery worth billions versus a drone costing a fraction of a single missile. A runway repaired in weeks versus 10 seconds of precision. The math was ruthless. The economics even more so. Every successful hit didn't just cause damage. It delayed production, disrupted exports, drained revenue, and forced Russia to spend more protecting less. By late 2025, the strikes had rhythm. Not predictable but patterned. Enough to keep defenses tense. Enough to deny recovery. Just when repairs began, another rupture arrived. The goal wasn't destruction. It was denial. Keep systems offline. Keep fuel scarce. Keep planners guessing. Because in modern war, uncertainty is a weapon. And then came December 11th. To outsiders, it looked sudden, massive, almost reckless. Hundreds of drones. Unprecedented range. But inside the plan, it was the opposite of chaos. It was convergence. Months of testing routes, studying radar shadows, measuring response times, training defenses to look in the wrong direction. The brilliance wasn't in how hard Ukraine hit. It was in how deliberately it spread the impact. Energy targets weren't isolated anymore. They were paired with airfields, fuel with flight paths, economics with operations. If a refinery burned, jets lacked fuel. If a runway cracked, missiles stayed grounded. Every strike echoed through another layer of the system. This is where strategy eclipses force. You don't need to win every battle when you can slow the war itself. You don't need dominance in numbers when you can dominate the tempo. Ukraine wasn't trying to overwhelm Russia's defenses. It was trying to tire them, stretch them thin, make every alarm feel like the wrong one. There's a quiet cruelty in that kind of warfare. Defenders stay awake longer. Crews rotate faster. Maintenance slips. Mistakes creep in. And once errors begin, precision takes over. Ask yourself this: what happens when an empire spends more energy defending its infrastructure than using it? When every barrel of oil requires twice the protection? When every airbase becomes a liability instead of an asset? That's the turning point Ukraine was aiming for. Not collapse in a day, but erosion by design. A paradigm shift where power isn't measured by how much you can destroy, but by how much you can prevent from functioning. December 11th wasn't a gamble. It was a proof of concept at scale. A message encoded in fire and distance. We can reach further. We can strike smarter. And we can choose when you get to recover. The lesson cuts deeper than this war. Strategy outlasts strength. Minds outmaneuver mass. And foresight, applied patiently, can make even the largest machine stumble under its own weight. But here's the unsettling question, the one that hangs in the smoke after the flames die down. If this was only the strategy phase, what happens when Ukraine decides it's time to change the rules again? It started with a mistake that wasn't a mistake at all. Radars lighting up over Moscow, alarms primed, screens filling with fast-moving blips that looked like the beginning of the end. In war, the capital is sacred ground. Every defense algorithm is written with one rule burned into its code: protect the center at all costs. Ukraine knew that, counted on it, and just before dawn, it pressed that instinct like a hidden switch. Dozens of drones moved toward Moscow, not screaming, not rushing, but drifting with intent. No payloads aimed at monuments, no coordinates for destruction. Their purpose was simpler, colder, more dangerous: to be seen, to be undeniable, to force a reaction. And the reaction came instantly. Air defenses surged to life. Interceptors launched. Command chains lit up. Civil authorities scrambled. Airports shut down like falling dominoes. Flights froze on runways. Passengers waited in terminals under emergency lights, staring at phones, refreshing news feeds, feeling the quiet panic spread. Sirens echoed. Shelters opened. A city of millions shifted into defense mode within minutes. From the outside, it looked like chaos. From the inside, it was discipline. Exactly the discipline Ukraine needed Russia to burn. Every drone over Moscow demanded attention. Every alert consumed manpower. Every interceptor fired was one less guarding something else. Air defense doesn't stretch infinitely. It bends. And when it bends too far, it snaps somewhere you're no longer looking. This was the decoy, not a feint out of desperation, but a precision deception built on psychology. Moscow wasn't chosen because it was weak. It was chosen because it was too important to ignore, because no commander wants to explain why they didn't respond to a threat over the capital, because history punishes hesitation more than overreaction. While Moscow watched the sky, something else was happening far beyond the headlines. The real drones weren't rushing toward lights and cameras. They were slipping through darker corridors, flying low, quiet, moving along routes mapped months in advance. They passed over regions where air defenses had thinned, redeployed, or simply stood down, waiting for orders that never came. This is the cruelty of a perfect decoy. It doesn't just distract. It reshapes reality. Defenders start fighting the wrong war in the wrong place at the wrong time. Think about the math. A single interceptor missile costs more than a small fleet of drones. Firing one feels justified. Firing dozens feels urgent. Firing hundreds becomes habit. And habits can be exploited. Russia didn't fail that night because it lacked defenses. It failed because it used them exactly as designed. As the hours dragged on, Moscow remained untouched. No fires, no craters, no dramatic footage of destruction. And that confused people. Critics asked the wrong question. Why didn't Ukraine strike the capital? Because the goal wasn't impact. It was immobilization. While attention stayed fixed on Moscow, refineries burned elsewhere. Fuel depots erupted. Airfields lost runways, hangars, supply lines. Targets that mattered more than symbols absorbed the shockwave. The war machine didn't collapse on camera, but it stalled where it hurt. This is what modern dominance looks like. Not conquest, control. Control of attention, control of reaction, control of tempo. The turning point wasn't when the first drone was detected. It was when Russia realized, too late, that it had defended the wrong thing perfectly. Moscow stood intact, but the infrastructure that fed the war had taken the hit. And that realization lingers longer than smoke. There's a lesson buried here, deeper than tactics. Force invites resistance. Deception invites compliance. When you make your enemy choose, you've already won something. When you decide what they choose between, you've won much more. Ukraine didn't overpower Russia's defenses. It guided them, like water diverted by carefully placed channels. Like a magician pulling eyes toward one hand while the other rewrites reality. Ask yourself this. How do you protect everything when the attack is everywhere, but only some of it is real? That question is now embedded in every Russian command briefing, every radar ping, every alert over the capital. The decoy worked not because it fooled Russia once, but because it can work again. And here's the uncomfortable truth that follows Moscow's quiet survival. If the capital was only ever bait, then the next phase won't be about distraction at all. It was just after midnight when the flames rose, not from a battlefield, but from the veins that fed the war, turning darkness orange where money used to flow. Wars aren't powered by speeches. They don't run on flags or fury. They run on fuel, on refined oil moving silently through pipes, depots, ports, and balance sheets. Ukraine understood this earlier than most, and once it did, the war shifted from front lines to infrastructure. At first, the strikes seemed isolated. A refinery here, a depot there. Enough to make headlines, not enough to panic markets. Russia repaired, restarted, adapted. But Ukraine wasn't chasing explosions. It was chasing downtime, because in energy warfare, hours offline matter more than craters. Then the pattern tightened. Refineries were hit again, and again. Not to destroy them completely, but to keep them limping. Each strike landed just as repairs began, forcing resets, new inspections, fresh delays. Engineers replaced parts that would never stay in place long enough to justify the effort. Production slowed. Inventories shrank. Export schedules slipped. Fuel depots followed. Storage tanks burned, not dramatically, but persistently. Enough to interrupt supply chains. Enough to force rerouting. Enough to make planners recalculate every movement twice. A tank division without fuel is just metal waiting to rust. An air force without aviation fuel is noise grounded by math. The genius wasn't scale. It was repetition. Every strike carried a hidden cost. Not just in lost barrels, but in confidence. Insurance premiums rose. Maintenance crews worked longer. Security expanded outward, stretching defenses thinner with every new perimeter. Russia began spending more to protect less, and that imbalance only grew. Then came the rupture no one expected. Far from borders, far from front lines, beyond the places war was supposed to reach, an offshore oil rig in the Caspian Sea lit up the night. Steel burned over open water. Production stopped instantly. Firefighters battled flames with nowhere to retreat, knowing every minute offline meant millions evaporating into smoke. This wasn't symbolic. This was surgical. An oil rig isn't just a structure. It's a node. It feeds refineries. It feeds exports. It feeds currency reserves. One platform offline doesn't end an economy, but it introduces doubt. And doubt spreads faster than fire. Do the math. A drone worth a few $100,000 versus millions lost per day in halted output. That's not warfare. That's leverage. A return on investment that no missile system can match. And it didn't end there. Repeated refinery strikes began to compound. Facilities stayed offline longer. Output fell incrementally, then noticeably. Diesel shortages crept in. Aviation fuel allocations tightened. Export volumes dipped. Revenue thinned. The war machine didn't stop, but it started to strain. This is where strategy eclipses spectacle. You don't need to starve a nation overnight. You just need to force it into inefficiency. To make every decision costlier than the last. To turn abundance into friction. When energy becomes unpredictable, everything downstream suffers. Logistics, operations, morale. Under Vladimir Putin's leadership, Russia built its power on energy dominance. Oil funded influence. Gas bought time. Exports softened sanctions. But when the lifeline is punctured repeatedly, dominance turns fragile. Cash flow shrinks. Flexibility disappears. War becomes more expensive the longer it lasts. And that's the trap Ukraine set. Not a knockout blow, but a slow bleed. One that doesn't look dramatic on maps, but shows up in spreadsheets. In maintenance logs, in canceled shipments, in commanders forced to choose which units get fuel and which wait. There's a philosophical edge to this kind of warfare. Firepower seeks to overwhelm. Strategy seeks to endure. When you attack energy, you're not fighting soldiers, you're fighting time. And time favors the side that thinks longer. The turning point wasn't when the first refinery burned. It was when Russia realized the attacks weren't stopping, that recovery windows no longer existed, that every repair plan came with an expiration date measured in days, not months. Ask yourself this: how do you fight a war when the resource that fuels it becomes a liability? When every barrel pumped requires protection? When every facility rebuilt becomes a target again? Ukraine didn't need to win the energy war outright. It just needed to make it unwinnable for Russia. And as the smoke settled over refineries and rigs, another question emerged. Quiet, unsettling, impossible to ignore. If Ukraine could reach this deep into Russia's energy heart, what happens when it decides to cut somewhere even more critical? It was 3:58 a.m. when the runway lights stayed dark. Not because of weather, not because of failure, but because the war had reached places it was never meant to touch. For years, Russian aircraft launched from safe distances, releasing missiles and glide bombs without ever crossing a dangerous line. The sky itself became a shield. Ukraine learned to live under it. And then, quietly, it learned how to break it. This wasn't revenge. It was reduction. Every missile that hits a city begins somewhere else, on a runway, in a hangar, beside a fuel truck, under the protection of layered air defenses. Ukraine stopped chasing the missiles in flight and went looking for their birthplace. Because if the aircraft never takes off, the strike never comes. The escalation was deliberate. Energy targets first, then airfields, not separately, together. Fuel without runways is useless. Runways without fuel are decoration. Pair them and the system collapses into friction. Across Russia, bases once considered untouchable felt the shockwave. Drones arrived low and precise, striking the parts no parade ever shows. Concrete split where wheels need traction. Hangars burned where maintenance keeps jets alive. Fuel depots erupted, not spectacularly, but effectively, forcing ground crews to stop, assess, wait. And waiting is fatal in modern war. Some bases went silent for days, others for weeks. Flights were canceled, sorties reduced, missiles delayed, glide bombs rationed. Each delay meant Ukrainian cities breathed a little longer. Each grounded aircraft shifted the balance by inches, but inches add up. Then came the message no map could hide. Drones reached regions that lived on distance alone. Arctic airfields, northern bases, places where geography once felt like armor. When a runway cracks that far from the front, the illusion of safety cracks with it. Commanders begin asking different questions. Not are we safe, but where aren't we? This is the turning point. Ukraine didn't need air superiority. It needed denial. Denial of launch. Denial of tempo. Denial of certainty. A single crater can neutralize an entire squadron if placed correctly. Precision beats volume. Always has. The cost equation was brutal. A drone versus a fighter jet. Thousands versus tens of millions. 10 seconds of impact versus months of repair. And every repair had a shadow because once a base is hit, it's marked forever. Defenses multiply. Resources drain. Efficiency dies. The pressure compounded. Russian air defenses were forced to stretch wider, cover more ground, protect more assets. Coverage thinned. Gaps appeared. Ukraine watched, learned, adjusted. The algorithm evolved. And the world noticed. These weren't desperate strikes. They were coordinated, timed, purposeful. A signal wrapped in smoke and silence. Ukraine wasn't just surviving. It was shaping the battlefield far beyond its borders. That message traveled faster than any drone. To Moscow, it said, your depth is no longer protection. Distance no longer guarantees immunity. Every base is now a variable, not a constant. To international partners, it said something even sharper. Ukraine still holds leverage, still holds capability, still holds initiative. This is not a side waiting to be rescued. This is a force adapting under pressure, choosing targets that matter, proving it can impose cost where it counts. And that matters when negotiations loom. Because peace built on weakness isn't peace. This postponement. Ukraine understands this. It knows that leverage at the table is earned in the field. Every grounded jet, every delayed strike, every disrupted launch strengthens its position in rooms far from the battlefield. There's a quiet philosophy here. Wars aren't decided by how loud the explosions are. They're decided by who controls options. Ukraine didn't eliminate Russia's air power, but it constrained it, reduced it, made it predictable. And predictability is the enemy of dominance. The lesson cuts across conflicts and centuries. Force breaks things. Strategy breaks systems. When you attack the system, recovery becomes optional, not guaranteed. And now, as airfields remain damaged and energy networks strained, a new question hangs in the air, one that no defense grid can intercept. If Ukraine has shown it can reach the launch points, what happens when it decides to redefine the launch itself?